Most people, when they hear the word genius, picture someone who arrived that way, born wired differently, touched by something the rest of us weren't. It's a comfortable story because it lets everyone off the hook. If genius is something you either have or you don't, then the distance between you and the greats is simply a matter of fate, not choice. I used to believe that. I don't anymore. And the reason I don't is a man who should, by every reasonable measure, not have existed. His name was Srinivasa Ramanujan. And before I tell you what he did, I want to tell you about the moment his work almost vanished forever. Because that near miss is the part of the story nobody talks about, and it explains something important about how we recognize genius when it doesn't look the way we expect it to. It was a morning in 1913, Cambridge, England. A mathematician named G.H. Hardy was sorting through his post. Hardy was not a warm man. He was brilliant, exacting, and deeply allergic to anything he couldn't prove from first principles. He had probably already discarded 2 or 3 letters that morning from amateur mathematicians who believed they had solved things they hadn't. He had a sense for cranks. He developed it out of necessity. The new envelope was thin, cheap paper, foreign postage. He opened it. What came out was 9 pages of mathematics, dense, unfamiliar, written in a hand he didn't recognize. The name at the bottom meant nothing to him. The return address was a shipping office in Madras, India. Hardy skimmed it. Some of what he saw looked wrong. Some of it looked like things he already knew, just written differently. He set it aside. He came back to it that evening. He brought his colleague, Littlewood, and the 2 of them sat together going through those 9 pages for hours. And the longer they looked, the more unsettled they became, because the results that had first looked wrong weren't wrong. They were right, profoundly, unexpectedly, almost offensively right. Results that neither of them could have derived. Results that seemed to come from a completely different way of seeing mathematics than anything being practiced in Europe at the time. Hardy would later say it was the most singular experience of his professional life. He wrote back to the unknown clerk in Madras within days. He had one question, the same question any honest mathematician would ask. He wanted to know how, not what. The what was sitting right there on the page. He wanted to know the method, the reasoning, the path that led from the question to the answer. Ramanujan's reply was not what Hardy was expecting. He said the formulas had come to him in dreams. Now, I want to sit with that for a moment, because the easy response, the response most people have, is to file that under colorful metaphor and move on. He obviously did the work somewhere, we just don't have access to it. The dream thing is just how he chose to describe his process. Except that explanation has a problem. Hardy worked alongside Ramanujan for years. He tried persistently to get Ramanujan to show his working. Not to be difficult, Hardy understood better than anyone that the results were genuine. He wanted the proofs because that was how mathematics worked. You didn't just arrive at truth, you built a road to it that other people could follow. And Ramanujan kept failing to produce the road. Not because he was hiding it, but because there wasn't one. He hadn't traveled a road, he had simply looked up and seen the destination. That is the thing I cannot explain, and I've spent a long time trying. Let me tell you who Ramanujan actually was, because his biography is the only evidence we have, and it points somewhere strange. He was born in 1987 in a small town in the state of Tamil Nadu. His family was Brahmin, high caste, but genuinely poor. His father collected rent for a landlord and earned almost nothing. From early childhood, Ramanujan showed an unusual relationship with numbers, not just aptitude, something closer to intimacy. By the time he was 10, he was asking his teachers questions they couldn't answer. By 15, he had acquired a single mathematics textbook, a dense Victorian-era collection of theorems, 5,000 of them, arranged with minimal explanation, and he began working through it the way other boys his age might have worked through a puzzle book, except the puzzles had no solutions printed in the back. He had to find them himself. This is the part I want you to really picture. No tutor, no curriculum, no one to tell him whether his approaches were valid or completely wrong. Just a teenager in southern India, in genuine poverty, reconstructing independently the mathematical discoveries of the previous 2 centuries, and then going further. By 17, he was producing results that had never been seen before. Original mathematics, not schoolwork, not exercises, actual new knowledge. He had no way to know this, of course. He had no one to compare notes with. He just kept filling notebooks. He failed out of college twice. Mathematics consumed him so completely that he neglected every other subject, and the system had no room for someone who was extraordinary in one direction and absent in all others. He got married. He needed income. He became a clerk. And here is the thing that gets me every time I think about it. During those years in the shipping office, stamping documents, recording cargo manifests, doing the administrative work of a port city, his mind never stopped. Every evening after work, the notebooks came out. The formulas kept coming. He had no audience, no validation, no professional standing. He just couldn't stop. He sent letters to mathematicians in Britain. The first 2 didn't respond. The third was Hardy. When Ramanujan finally arrived in Cambridge in 1914, having never left India, having never experienced winter, struggling to find food that fit his strict vegetarian diet in a country that barely understood the concept, Hardy finally had extended access to the mind behind those 9 pages, and what he found there defied his entire framework for how mathematical knowledge was produced. Ramanujan could look at a formula and know if it was true. Not suspect, not estimate, know. He would assert things with complete calm, and when Hardy pressed for justification, Ramanujan would sometimes attempt a proof, and sometimes simply look at Hardy with polite confusion, as if being asked to explain why the sky appeared to be above them. The truth to Ramanujan was apparently just visible. The question was why Hardy couldn't see it too. Now here is the reframe I promised you. Because at this point in the story, the temptation is to conclude that Ramanujan was simply operating on a different cognitive plane, supernatural, inexplicable, end of discussion. But I think that conclusion, satisfying as it feels, is actually a way of avoiding the more interesting question. Think about what expertise actually does to a mind. Not surface-level familiarity, but the deep, saturating kind that comes from years of total immersion. A master chess player doesn't analyze a board move by move the way a beginner does. They perceive the board. The patterns register instantly, below the threshold of deliberate thought, because those patterns have been encountered and processed thousands of times until the recognition became automatic. The grandmaster isn't smarter than the beginner in any general sense. They have simply internalized so much structure that what looks like intuition is actually compressed experience firing faster than language can follow. Ramanujan spent the better part of a decade doing nothing but mathematics, in isolation, with no one to tell him how problems were supposed to be approached. He developed no methodology because he had no one to teach him one. What he developed instead was something raw and in some ways more powerful, a direct perceptual relationship with mathematical structure built up through years of solitary encounter. By the time he wrote that letter, he had internalized patterns that most mathematicians encounter gradually over a career, scaffolded by instruction and institution. He had absorbed them alone, without the scaffold, which meant the knowledge had integrated into something closer to instinct than technique. The dreams weren't divine. They were the output of a pattern recognition system so finely trained that it kept generating results even when Ramanujan's conscious mind stepped aside. The goddess Namagiri, whom Ramanujan credited with writing the formulas, was the only framework available to him to describe an experience that even modern neuroscience would struggle to articulate. Something in him was working at a level he couldn't access or examine, so he named it. But here is where the story takes a turn I wasn't prepared for the first time I encountered it. Ramanujan's health collapsed in England. The cold, the dietary restrictions, the isolation, the tuberculosis that quietly established itself in his lungs, it all accumulated. He returned to India in 1919. He was 31 years old, and he was dying, and he knew it. He died in April 1920. In the months before his death, he was still working, still filling notebooks, and in one of his last communications to Hardy, he described a set of mathematical objects he called Mach theta functions. He offered almost no context, no derivation, just the objects themselves and a few observations about their behavior. Hardy read the letter and was at a loss. He had spent years navigating Ramanujan's mind, and this was beyond even that extended understanding. He filed it away. Mathematicians examined it for decades. It remained essentially a beautiful locked room, clearly significant, stubbornly opaque. In 2002, 82 years after Ramanujan wrote that letter, a mathematician named Sanders Weggers finally decoded what Mach theta functions actually were and where they fit in the mathematical landscape. The result rippled outward into several fields, and among the places these functions turned out to apply, one of the places where Ramanujan's deathbed mathematics found a home was the physics of black holes. Specifically, the quantum states of black holes, a concept that didn't exist as a serious scientific framework until decades after Ramanujan died. He had described the mathematical structure of something the physical world hadn't yet given anyone reason to look for. I've turned that over my mind many times, and the most honest thing I can say is that I don't have a clean explanation for it. The compressed experience model accounts for a lot of what Ramanujan did. Deep pattern recognition, unconscious processing, instinct honed to an almost incomprehensible degree. All of that is real, and it explains a great deal. But it doesn't fully account for a man seeing the outlines of a concept that no human mind had yet formed. That part remains genuinely open. What I do believe, what I think his story demonstrates with uncomfortable clarity, is that the ceiling on human understanding is almost certainly higher than our institutions suggest. That the way we train minds, through curriculum and credential and structured progression, produces knowledge that is broad and communicable and useful, but may inadvertently cap something. That there is a different kind of knowing available to a mind that encounters a subject raw and total and alone, that our systems are not built to produce and barely equipped to recognize. Ramanujan failed twice out of formal education. He was invisible to his profession for years. The letters that could have reached someone were ignored. The one that reached Hardy almost wasn't opened. We talk about not wanting to miss the next great mind, but the question his life actually raises is harder than that. The question is whether the way we've arranged things would even let us see one if it arrived. I don't have a comfortable answer to that. I suspect Ramanujan didn't either. But I think asking it honestly is more useful than the inspiring version of his story, the one where everything works out and genius finds its way. It found its way, in his case, barely, once, through a single opened envelope.